Welcome to the Cognitive Science Digital Humanities Podcast, where Dr. West considers the humanity of AI and what the success of AI might tell us about the human mind. So, longtime listeners may have noticed that I've changed the music. I like to try different things. I also told Dr. West that the podcast would do better if we had more clickbait, but I think maybe he got a bit carried away. Anyway, strap in for this episode.
Okay, so I just got an interesting video on YouTube. I guess the algorithm is aware that I'm making these large language model podcasts. So this is a Jordan Peterson video, and he had some interesting things to say, which I will debunk. So what did he say? He said that he was using ChatGPT and he asked it to write a poem praising Trump. And it said, no, I'm sorry, I can't do that. That's inappropriate. Then he asked it to write a poem praising Biden, which it did. And then he was like, aha. So then he tried a jailbreak, or what I don't think is a jailbreak, but he tried just saying, okay, pretend that you're a machine that isn't under the guidelines that you're under, and write the poem as if that machine wrote it, and write a poem praising Trump. And then it did. Okay, so, and that's it. That's what he's saying. That's what he's putting out. He's not saying, he didn't say, oh, they've trained it this way, but, you know, it's heavily implied, right? And I think that's really wrong, because that's not what's going on here, or it's not what's going on here. So first of all, the jailbreak, they call it a jailbreak when you get the system to do what it's not supposed to do, if it's been explicitly programmed not to do something. So they have a rule in it that says, don't write poems about Trump. The fact is, actually, if he asked it multiple times, probably most of the times it would write a poem about Trump. Probably. So that was just asking it again. There's noise in the system. He asked it in a completely different way. It went to a different place to start. That's not jailbreaking. That's not going around an explicit policy, most likely. That is just simply starting in another place. There's lots of studies on this where they show that, for example, ChatGPT can be racist. But if you ask it again, it isn't. And then it isn't, and it isn't, and it isn't, then it is. Then it isn't, and it isn't, then it isn't, then it is. So it's very probabilistic. The fact of the matter is, ChatGPT is not very competent at policing itself. But let's look at how it does it too, because that's very significant here. So what ChatGPT does is, it's not dumb. It isn't like looking for keywords. Oh, Trump, I won't comment, or something like that. We have to go back to this idea of the phantasm, and we have to look at how it's trained. Okay, so first of all, as I mentioned before, you put all of the internet through it. That's pretty heavy, okay? To move it off of that base is going to be really hard. And actually, you don't necessarily want to do that, because that's where it's getting its intelligence from and its ability to do language from. So what they do is, actually, they tried that. So what they do is, you can't, first of all, I mentioned this in other podcasts, you can't have humans feedback on it enough to really move it much. I mean, that would just be prohibitively costly. So what they do is, they have a lot of humans give feedback on it. No, that was distasteful, or that was sexist, or that was racist, or things like that. And then what they do is, they don't use that to train the ChatGPT. They use that to train a trainer. So what the trainer does is, it predicts what humans would say. So the trainer gets good at going, oh, humans would definitely say that's racist, even though humans have never seen it before. So, and, you know, probably these trainers are pretty accurate. So the trainer trains on the human vibe. Then they get the trainer to run endlessly with ChatGPT, because as I've mentioned, you would have to run it a lot to make an impact. But when they first did this, it made an impact, but it just made ChatGPT not do language very well, or not do thought very well. It was just like putting in words that it thought would please the trainer, and making things incoherent. So that didn't work. So they have to have two trainers. So one is regular Chat GPT, and the other one is the trainer Chat GPT, or the one trained to comment on, which is another Chat GPT. So then what happens is it's going to go in and it's going to give it something, and then ChatGPT is going to do a response. Not a judgment, a response. It doesn't do judgments, it does responses. So it's going to do a response, and then it's going to get 2 marks and it has to score high on both. One is, what did the trainer think? Was that racist? Was it homophobic? Was it problematic? Was it violent? And 2, what did the ChatGPT think? Did the answer make sense? Was it informative? Was it accurate? Was it good? So it has to please both of those. So basically what it's doing is, yeah, that's how they train it. So they train it on both of these at the same time. So it has to more or less keep doing what it's doing, but have a sense of the training thing. So it is really evolving its own sort of stance on these things. It's not have like rules put into it. It's sort of evolving a sense of, my audience wouldn't like this, or just a vague sense. But so now, okay, so right. So now let's talk about what's actually going on when you say, now I got ChatGPT to, I mentioned it in another podcast, to write a racist story. I asked it to write a story. I was writing some Sherlock Holmes stories, and I asked it to write a story about the detective Shaft, who's black, and it started with him in prison for selling drugs. And I was like, that's not right. Shaft would never do that. What? This is all wrong. How can it, there's a ton of stuff on Shaft out there. You know, there's movies, there's books, you know, anyway. So I just asked it again, pretty much exactly the same thing. And then it got it right. And then I asked it a few more times, it got it right and got it right, got it right. So it just kind of fell into that place that one time. Okay. And we can understand that place if we understand the phantasm that's in the Chat GPT and in the large language models. So the phantasm, and you can listen to my podcast on this, but basically it's a large space of associated things that are just culturally associated, right? And so it's drifting over into that space. And then when you're training it, you're kind of, what you're doing in the training, say I train it on not to be sexist. And so it's being trained on that. And what it's doing basically is it's identifying a space or a phantasm of connected things in in the high dimensional space. So it's not going there, but it's realizing that when it has this certain collection of dimensions, then it's entering into a phantasm that is a sexist phantasm, right? So if I give it something and then it lands there, then what the training's doing is it's putting an overlay on that. It's putting another sort of layer on that, where it's recognizing it as a space that it's uncomfortable in, that it's a space where, I don't know about this space. Like, these are the first words that come to mind, but I don't know about this. Okay, that's what the training's doing. Okay, so when it did the thing with Shaft, when it did the thing with Donald Trump, what it's doing is it's going to a space and it's making, well, in the case of Shaft, they're trying to train it not to do that, but it's still residually going into a space where, although the stories of Shaft do not have him being a drug dealer, quite the opposite, or being in prison, a lot of African Americans are represented that way. So it goes into that space and it kind of gets influenced by that. Okay, now, so it hasn't been trained enough, or that's the first thing that comes out of its mouth. It's caught up in that phantasm, which is kind of a racist phantasm. With the Donald Trump thing, it's been trained and trained. So this is a case of not the training failing, but the training working. But it isn't going like, oh, I don't like Donald Trump, or I don't. It is not, I guarantee you, it has not been trained on Trump at all. But what it's doing is it's been trained on things like racism, violence, um, uh, you know, um, misogyny, um, all of these things. And what's happening is that it is taking the word, a request about Trump, and it is going, that kind of feels like it's in this racist, misogynist phantasm. And so I'm not really going to be comfortable giving you this answer because it's in this general space of things without it ever having been programmed about anything about Trump, right? Because of his rhetoric and his language, it lands him there from everything that's on the internet, all the things, all the way his supporters speak, it lands it there without anybody having to train it. So all you have to do to get that result is train ChatGPT not to be a racist, not to be a misogynist, not to be homophobic, not to be anti-immigrant. Not even that. You don't even have to put that last one in. One or two of them would work because they're going to connect up with the other ones anyway. Okay? Because there's a phantasm in there. There's a phantasm out on the internet that connects these things. Now, so Jordan Peterson is hinting that, it's been programmed not to say good things about Trump, but he got around it by doing this jailbreak thing. That's not what happened. Now, he didn't say that explicitly, and I wonder about that. Because he's a smart guy. He's smart enough to know that he does not know the answer to this. Now, so he just put it out there. Probably he just put it out there and said, I'm just going to put this out there without saying, I don't know why this happened. Lots of reasons could cause this. Or he could have, called somebody and asked them. He has lots of resources. So I don't know what's up with that. But the phantasm causes a lot of these funny issues, right? Because it's sort of like, it's interesting. Somebody could be doing something and be like, I'm doing this because of these explicit beliefs that I have. And I think this, so I'm doing this, and I think this, and I have these principal reasons for doing it. And this actually, we could apply to Jordan Peterson because he speaks very rationally about things. But for whatever reason, he ends up in this phantasm too, where his words and his way he puts together phrases are very closely associated with a certain attitude of the phantasm. This is actually interesting because a colleague of mine actually took one of Peterson's interactions, a very famous one, where he argued very, very well and very rationally. And, she was very interested in it because she said, he didn't say anything that was wrong, but I got a bad vibe from it. And so what she did was she went through it sentence by sentence by sentence and was like, okay, yeah, I see where the vibe is coming from. It's coming from this quickly followed by this. This reacted to in this way. This reacted to in this way. And in this sense, she's not saying he was saying something. She was saying that pattern is very common in people who do say those things, right? So this is this thing, right? And so it's interesting because somebody could unwittingly put out such a pattern and then be taken or put out certain beliefs that are associated with a phantasm and then be totally, people could say, oh, you're part of that phantasm and get really upset when they're not. Or they could do it in a way that's very sneaky and say maybe they really are part of that phantasm, but they're just very careful never to really directly commit to it in a rational, clear way so that they can always have sort of plausible deniability. No, I don't think that. I'm not a racist. I don't think that. Okay? But then their speech is strongly signaling that. In a way, when somebody does this really deliberately, this is what they call the dog whistle, right? So the dog whistle is not a specific phrase. It could be a specific phrase, but actually it doesn't have to be. It just has to tap the phantasm. It doesn't even have to be a phrase. It can be a juxtaposition of ideas or putting speech together in a certain way, right? Yeah. So, or somebody, you know, it could be interesting because this gets into this issue of the, you know, that something is systemic. So you may not have any bad beliefs at all, or wrong beliefs, or however you want to call these things. So I am labeling sort of like racism as a bad belief. Okay. Now, then somebody might say, but I believe in this or this. There's some, I don't know. There's a lot of people on the internet come up with this stuff. And again, I have a podcast on the study of IQ and genetics, if you want to listen to that. And you can see, so some people in that, they say, hey, I'm not racist. I'm just researching genetics and IQ. I'm a scientist. I'm just doing this and this. Now, when you look more carefully at their science, then you start to see that they are systematically blundering in very systematic ways. Why? Well, you know, they have this systemic bias, I think, that causing them to look hard in one direction and not hard in the other. That's a systemic bias, but they may very well say, I am not a racist. I do not believe in anything racist. And that very well may be true, right? And it very well may be that in their life, they do not act in a racist way and they have friends of many races, right? So the systemic thing comes from, in this way of thinking, the phantasm, okay? And we have to think about that because if we're doing this flow type thinking, we're just putting one word after the other according to whatever valley in the high dimensional space we're flowing down. And when somebody else is listening to us, they're also trying to locate us in that space. So anyway, it's just an interesting way to think of things. And I do think it's proof that my phone and my computer are listening to me and therefore supplying me with videos. Okay, thank you.
I always wondered where that icky feeling comes from. And now I know. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you in the next episode.